Welcome to this edition of Tuesday Talks with Twyla. Today we're going to talk about thought swapping. So this is something that I've cautioned about and something that I've talked about in this concept, in this way of just swapping thoughts. And I want to make sure that we address this specifically because some of my recommendations or my processes do include taking a look at the thoughts and deciding if that's what we want to think and choosing our thoughts intentionally. And so, technically, by definition, we are thought swapping when we do that, right? But today I want to talk about it in a way where we are not being very intentional about the consequences or the ramifications of just swapping the thoughts. And I'm bringing this to you because this is something that I've discovered for myself. As I started my journey with doing thought work and understanding how my thoughts create my feelings, I got very good at thought swapping. So I would recognize that a thought would create a feeling that I didn't want to feel. And so I would thought swap. And I got into this habit of just swapping my thoughts. Anytime a negative emotion would come up, I would find the thought and I would switch out the thought. I would swap the thought for something that would create a different emotional reaction. And this is, by definition, some of the processes of establishing the awareness, discovering the thoughts we're thinking, and being intentional around them to create a different experience. But what I was creating and what this creates for us is a situation where we are avoiding or suppressing or resisting a thought and emotion that needs our attention. Because if this was something that didn't have a significant emotional impact, the ramifications would be minimal or none, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. But when you learn to do this and then you do it to your detriment, I want to make sure that we're understanding what's happening and what we should do differently. So if you follow my processes, there is a step in there where we take the time to acknowledge where we're at before we move on to a new thought. So we get to become aware, discover our thoughts, and make decisions around them. But before we choose the new thought, or before we practice the new thought, before we move on to the new thought, there's a pause there. And it's significant because if we don't, those old thoughts will just keep coming up. And they might come up just a little bit different each time. They might come up at different times, like sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes when we're stressed during the day. But they'll just continue to come up if we don't address them. So this might look like if your reaction to these things isn't to thought swap, it might look like just a lot of confusion around like this isn't working because this keeps coming up and I just keep having to redirect or readdress or pick a different thought, or I thought I picked this thought, why does this thought keep coming up? And what's happening is that needs our attention. That needs us to acknowledge it, allow it, become aware of it, and give it that attention it needs before we move on, right? Because our thoughts are always optional. And the experience that we get to create in our life can be whatever we decide we want it to be. But that also means dealing with what our bodies are going through, what our minds are bringing us, and not just thought swapping, not just skimming over, avoiding, resisting, right? We've got to deal with this first. And you'll know if you have this because these things will just keep coming up. My caution here is that it could come up differently. And so you might not realize that that's what's happening. And so, whatever underlying thing that needs your attention, it might come up as this stressful thing or this irritating thing, or it might look a little different. And so, you might just feel like you just always have, something coming up that you have to redirect. So, we want to be very curious about what's happening. And we want to be very aware if we're just thought swapping. Because for me, I thought I was being, a super coach, right? That was my superpower. I was able to self-coach and I was able to, find my thoughts and pick my thoughts. And that's what I was doing. I was thought swapping. And yeah, for me, the things keep coming up, but because I got so good at thought swapping, I wasn't even realizing that they were coming up. And so I was just super swift at it. I got so good at it that I had to try really hard. Like, what is actually there? My awareness step became this huge overhaul. Like, what is actually there? Because before I could actually get my hands on or my awareness around the thought, I was already on to, no, I don't think that, I think this, right? No, I don't think that, I think this. But I do think this, right? It does come up. I just swiftly thought swap it. But those things are sometimes those ingrained beliefs, those inherited beliefs that we've just collected, that we've just acquired through things around us that influence us. Our childhood, for sure, right? Our parents or our family, things that are said, the way things are said, the way they reacted or treated certain scenarios. And we just absorb that. We just inherit that. We just don't even realize that we've kind of taken that on, that it's influenced us. And it's there, and it's kind of part of our foundational beliefs. It's part of our like frameworks or structures that we don't give a lot of awareness to, a lot of airtime to, because it's just there, right? It's like, it's part of us. It feels like it's who we are, it feels like. And so getting our awareness around that can be very challenging, especially if you've been doing the thought swapping like me. So what this looks like is, even when you're trying to slow down and get curious about what you're thinking, which these steps are the intermittent check-ins if you do it that way, or if you do the thought download. And the thought download for me has sometimes been challenging. There's time, even in the beginning, when I first started coaching, and that was one of the recommended ways to kind of reveal our minds to ourselves. And I've been a journaler, so it's not like I don't already grab a notebook or grab my journal and write down what comes up. I've done that regularly. My whole life I've done that. But if my goal was to just like unload my mind, like empty out the junk drawer, for me, a lot of times when I would be like that intentional about kind of getting everything, I would sit down with my notebook, and that blank page just felt like a reflection of my blank mind. Like I couldn't come up with anything. And what I've come to discover is, if I can do something to distract myself just enough where I'm thinking about like a sentence or a question, right? If I've got a structured journaling prompt, or I'm listening to a coach or a mentor, and they're kind of walking us through, and they're having us, kind of answer questions, or they're asking us questions to kind of get curious about what we have going on. as I'm, interpreting the question and I'm kind of distracted in, okay, what are they asking for? What's the answer to this question? Then there's more, it's easier for me to, more comes up, more comes out. I'm able to find what's there. And so that makes it easier for me. But what I discovered is if I'm not distracted, because I started to notice, like, how come when I have these questions or I have something specific I'm looking for, I'm able to find the answers. I'm able to come up with what's in my mind. And I was able to realize that there's some old, really old foundational beliefs or like just frameworks that are just there, just inherently there, that I didn't realize was there because when I would go to do the work, that wouldn't come up. And then I got curious about that. Like, why doesn't it come up? How come when I just, ask myself a more like vague or blanket question, I don't get kind of this dump of information? And when I got really curious about that and noticed that if I have a specific question or if and it wasn't even the specific questions that I noticed this, it was when I was more distracted in, so the stuff I was working on, to give you a frame of reference, was some questions, but also like some affirmations. And so some statements that went along with it. And so kind of when you find the information, then you would have these affirmations to help solidify some different thoughts, some different beliefs. And I would notice that once I would shift my perspective to these affirmations, that's when I would discover almost like this bubbling up of these other thoughts, these foundational thoughts. And not really I wasn't able to discover where they come from. Like if it came from my childhood, if it came from my upbringing, if it came from certain people around me, like, it wasn't that specific, but I was like, oh, those are there. But they were hard to find. And I realized that that's what I was doing is I was swapping the thoughts so I want to say efficiently, so swiftly that I wasn't able to grab the first thought that I was changing. And I had just taught myself that I want to think this way. And what happens in that scenario is in the moment when I'm saying that and I'm intentional and I want to think this way, then intentionally I'm doing that. But what's playing in the background that's back there, like the white noise that I talk about all the time, what's playing back there that I just wasn't able to get my fingers on was these foundational beliefs, were these thoughts that when they did come to my awareness, I would swap them. I don't think that way. I think this way. But I wasn't processing those thoughts. I wasn't actually becoming aware, figuring out, like the actual thought feelings, like how do I show up when I think that way and I'm feeling that way. I hadn't gotten that in depth. The thought would come up and I would swap it out. But it wasn't processed and it didn't go away. It just was suppressed. It just was ignored and still there, still very much there. And even harder for me to discover. And so I do find a lot of times when I'll ask my clients, like, what are you thinking or what comes up for you, that they struggle with that sometimes. And I do too. And I wanted to like really figure out like why do I struggle with that? What's causing this? Right? And all along it was me. It was my behavior. It was the way I was self-coaching that was causing all of this. And I think that as coaching has gotten just more visible, more talked about, more available, we see more about this being, intentional about our thoughts and choosing our thoughts and creating our reality, creating our experience. And that part of it, if you do what I did, is you attach to or you pick up that part and you're like, oh, so I want to think positive. I want to, you know, redirect my thoughts. I want to think this instead. And we move in that direction. And we have that, right? We have that ability always to choose our thoughts, redirect, be intentional, think these thoughts instead. But the instead part is like what we don't realize is, it's kind of like changing, I don't know why this just came to mind, but it's like changing the tire on your car, right? You can't put another tire on. You have to take the other tire off and put the new tire on. You've replaced it, right? You can't have them both there at the same time. And with our thoughts, we can. We very much can. We have, I don't even know what the number is, thousands, right? Tens of thousands of thoughts a day. I don't even know how many in a minute, right? Our brains are multifaceted. So there's a lot of thoughts all the time. And so you can have where you add the thought to it, that you don't process and get rid of the old before you move on to the new. It's very possible. It's what we do. It's what we can do because we get to be intentional and we get to decide. But there's still a lot of other stuff still there. And you might be directing your thought in this one area or about this one specific thing, right? And so it's specific to that, but there's still all these other thoughts. There's still all these other parts and pieces to our lives, to our brains, to our thoughts and our feelings from, a million different directions. So our reality is we can, in the moment, be intentional about directing our thoughts. And I did a webinar on this that if I ask you, what are you thinking about right now? You're going to be specific, right? You're going to turn your direction to my question. And you'll give me the first thought that comes to your mind. But that's not all of your thoughts, right? And I guess that's when I grab my journal and the blank sheet and I'm trying to unload all of it. I'm asking for all the thoughts. Well, what are the chances that we get all the thoughts? I get a whole bunch, or I get a lot, or, I sometimes struggle to get any. But when you direct your mind to just the one thought, and you're focused on just that, and you say, okay, but I don't want to think that way. I want to think this way instead. And you basically thought swap, or you redirect your mind. What happens to all this other stuff, right? What happens to the old tire? Because we can have both, we can have it all. We still have some of those old thoughts. We still have all this old unprocessed thinking, beliefs, foundations, frameworks. They're still there. And so for me, I realized that those are still there. They're still influencing me. They're still just under the surface, it seemed like. And I really had to almost do the opposite. Instead of being like intentional with my blank sheet of paper and getting it all out and actually dumping out the junk drawer, I had to be a little more distracted to allow that to come up. And, I don't know why. I don't know if that just felt safe or if I've just been, practicing this for so long that that's just the patterned behavior that I've created for myself. I don't know what the reason was that it was really hard for me to find this, because I have struggled with this from the beginning of my coaching experience. So when I very first found coaching and self-coaching tools, and this was one of the practices, I've struggled with it from the very beginning. And even when there would be like a series of questions, sometimes like I just wasn't even able to answer the question. But then once I would move on, then maybe like something would come up. And so it's interesting that for me, having a little bit of distraction, have a little bit of distance there, allowed more of that to bubble up to the surface, to come into my awareness. And since I discovered this, I try to be really, it's almost like I try to be really careful not to scare it away again. And I just imagine like Casper, the invisible ghost, for any of you that are my age or older, you know who Casper, the invisible ghost is, but the friendly ghost. He wasn't invisible. He was invisible, but he was the friendly ghost, Casper, the friendly ghost. You know, you could startle him and he'd go, he'd go away, he'd go hide. And I had to just kind of allow and not put my focus there. I had to just kind of keep my focus here and allow that to come up and then write it down as quickly as I could as it came out, as I was able to get my awareness around it. But I felt like I had to be really delicate with it so that it didn't just vanish, that it didn't go back to its hiding place, that it didn't go back to wherever it was. And these aren't what I would say traumatic thoughts. They're not disturbing thoughts. They're nothing like that. I mean, really, for the most part, none of them are a big deal. The work I'm doing right now is around money. So I want to say it's not emotional at all, but money can be very emotional. It can be very stressful. It can be very challenging. It can be very difficult. So there can be like all of this negative emotion around it. And when I started this work, I was like, I don't have any of that. I don't have any of those feelings or thoughts about money. In my former life, I was an accountant. Like in high school, I knew I was going to be an accountant. I went to school for accounting, and ended up being a governmental accountant my entire adult career. So numbers are neutral to me, and they are what they are. They're not good or bad. They're just the numbers are, and they reflect and tell a story, and they just show the status. And I just have never, I just related to that. That was my thoughts around it. But as I was doing this, there's a lot more thoughts I have around like personal finances, of course. So like if I separate them out, it's like, yeah, I think all that neutral stuff, and I think all that about financial statements and, wherever I work, their money and their financial statements and their financial status and, anywhere or whatever, like it just, those are neutral. This is the story it tells. This is the information that it reveals, like all of that. Like it's just very neutral, just is the numbers are what they are. And then you make decisions around them. And if you don't want this number to be this number, you want it to be something different, then what do we do? What is the proactive way, or how do we handle it? Like it's very constructive in my mind. And so I just felt like I adopted that same philosophy around my personal finances. And I just like, this is how I feel about this. And so when I actually allowed myself to get like, maybe there's something more there. Maybe there's some more thoughts and feelings there. There was, but it was difficult for me to find them. And then I started to notice, become aware, build my awareness around like, how often am I thought swapping? And the first time I discovered this, my coach brought it to my attention, because if I have anything stressing me out, it comes to my attention very early in the morning. And so when I was still working my very stressful job, it would wake me up at like 4 or 5 in the morning. And that's what I would wake up to, was like this panicked feeling and just panicked thoughts. What am I forgetting? What do I have to do? Like there was just always panic around it, and just like pit of my stomach. And being the coach, the trained coach, I was like, well, I don't want to feel this way, so I need to change these thoughts. And for a while, I realized that I was having like thought loops. So I would, and then they call like a thought stack. So it wasn't just, what do I have to do and what, how am I going to get it all done? Like all the amount of work that I had, but then anything else that was stressful. So then I would just layer on, right? And I would just keep stacking, whatever stressful thing, all of it would come up at the same time. And so when I had been talking to my coach about this, and she's like, you just need to lean in to the emotion. And so instead of swapping the thoughts, changing the thoughts to change my feeling, which is what I would try to do because it's early in the morning, my alarm's about to go off. I want to get the last few minutes of sleep I can get. And so that was my process, was to change my thoughts and think peaceful thoughts so that I could fall back to sleep. Rarely would it work. They would just keep looping back and I'd have to I was just actively redirecting my thoughts, which was not peaceful and relaxing, and it wasn't allowing me to go back to sleep because I was actively thinking. And so she recommended I just lean into the emotion. I just allowed it to be there. So I thought, okay, that sounds great. 4 or 5 in the morning. Who doesn't want to feel panic and fear and, whatever else was overwhelmed, stress, all this that was happening? Okay, let's try it, right? So when it happened first thing in the morning, or first time it happened after that, and it comes up, and I just gave it my attention. And so what that means to lean into the emotion was just, I feel, and I would describe it. I feel, and I would name it and describe it. It feels like a pit in my stomach. And I'd be laying in bed, husband sleeping next to me, and I would just do this in my mind. I didn't say the words out loud. And so it, didn't disturb him. It didn't wake him. He didn't know I was having this conversation in my mind. But I just allowed it. So instead of trying to run from it, thought swap from it, I just was like, okay, I feel panic. I feel fear. This is where I feel it at. I feel this right now, and for some of us, we want to add in like, and I'm okay. And I wasn't afraid to feel the emotion. I wasn't afraid of that. I didn't have to reassure myself that it was going to be okay. I knew that I could do this and I was comfortable doing it. And I knew it wasn't going to last forever and I wasn't going to be stuck in the horrible emotion or the discomfort. And so I just allowed it and know that it can be that simple, and I want to say easy because it ended up being very easy. And so I just allowed it. And the next day, it was not the very next day that it happened again. It only happened once or maybe twice after that, where that panic morning waking me up happened again. So I know it happened at least one more time because I was like, okay, I know what to do here, right? And so I want to call it the episode itself lasted less time the second time. And I didn't resist it at all. I was like, okay, here we go. And you'll know it'll just be complete, right? And so in both times, I fell back to sleep. And so however long it took or that I spent doing that, and then I just fell back to sleep. And it didn't happen again. So the need to process that is there, and knowing what to do with that and how to do it. I mean, it is very simple. It is just allowing, it is just acknowledging, accepting, which is naming it, describing it, allowing it in the body, noticing where you're feeling it at, like all of that. And it's minutes, it's not hours, you're not stuck there forever. It's nothing like that. It's designed to process through. But if it doesn't, it just stays there and waits. It's very patient. So it's not going to go anywhere. And so know that it's not going to go anywhere, which means it's there for you to process whenever you get your awareness around it. Like for me, I didn't even realize there was some of this stuff because it would come up differently. It doesn't come up clear like I think this, right? It would come differently. And so I had to get really curious. I had to be very I had to just be like a private investigator. I had to get really curious about it. And for me, I had to know that there was something there and almost just allow it to come up on its own while I was distracting my mind somewhere else, to just let it do its thing. So notice if you have taken any of this, or if you've gotten it somewhere else and you've gotten into the habit of swapping your thoughts. Because I'm all for deciding how we want to think, creating our experience, and I will continue to scream that from the rooftops. But I will also tell you in tandem that you can't ignore whatever you do have that you discover and become aware of. Wherever you are right now, we can't skip that part. We have to figure that out, know what that is, and process it through. And I think that for some of us, I think that we don't know. Like, our first thought is, I don't know how to do that. Our second thought might be, I don't want to do that. It's going to be uncomfortable. I don't care to feel that discomfort. I might get stuck in the emotion. There can be all of that around it. But also you could have where you're like me, like, I don't have any of that. I don't have that. That was my thought, right? But here's how I knew that I did have something. Because as I'm telling you guys to create your experience, and we talk about what we want that experience to be and whatever you want in life and how you want your life to be. And when I started to look at my experience, it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And so when I backed into it, right, we talk about the model, and you can go forward to backward, you can jump in the middle, and any piece of the model you can start with, and you can work it forwards and backwards, and you can get the whole picture from any spot in the model. And so I knew that, like, my experience, which would be the results, wasn't what I wanted it to be. But I felt like, I want to say intellectually, but I felt like I was doing all the things that I'm telling you guys to do. Choose your thoughts, be intentional with your thoughts, right? Create the feeling that you want to experience, and then you'll show up in a certain way. You'll show up, you'll take action in alignment with those feelings. And, right, your actions are what create your results. And so I was like, if my results aren't what I want, then I'm not taking action in alignment with that. Then I must not be thinking and feeling in alignment with my results. I'm not creating the experience that I want to be experiencing. Why not? Like, what's there? There must be something else, and it's like, well, again, what am I thinking? And my go-to thoughts, or my, what would come up when I would ask, would be some positive thoughts. Like, well, I'm doing the right things. I'm thinking the right things. So I had to get really curious and just like, no, there's got to be something else here, right? And this is how you know if you have a misaligned model, because the model reveals exactly, right? Like, all of it has to align. It's just how the universe works. It's how the energetic world works. It's just how it all functions. There can't be a mismatch. There can't be misalignment. It would be chaos. Our world would be chaos. And so if you have this result, you have a thought that's creating it, because that's the shortcut, right? Is your thoughts create your results. And how it does is it creates your feelings. You show up a certain way, you act a certain way, and that creates your results. So if you don't have the results you want, there's something else in the thought line. There's something else in your mind that's creating a different emotional reaction response in your body, and you're showing up a different way. And that's a different model. And so, I was like, well, these are the thoughts I'm thinking. And, I guess, this is kind of how, I didn't get curious enough about how I was feeling. It's like, well, I think I feel good because I'm thinking good, right? But that's where I started to get out of alignment. We just have to dig in and figure it out. What is actually happening? And the model is what just spells it all out for us. It's what shows you everything in its relationship so that you can see the alignment. And if something's misaligned, then you've got parts of multiple models because everything has to align. And that's just the laws of the universe. It's just like when we talk about this stuff, I mean, it's just the way everything works. It is the physics, it is the metaphysics, it is the quantum field, it's all of that. It's just the way the world works. Because if it didn't, it would be chaos. And so for me, the chaos I had was in my misaligned models with my misaligned information that was not giving me the right information. I was not filling them in correctly. I was not finding the pieces that aligned. The information from inside my mind and my brain in my life, I wasn't finding all of the information. I was thought swapping. And I was still having emotions related to other thoughts that I was intellectually telling myself, I'm not thinking that, I'm thinking this. Because I was so swift with it. I was so sneaky to my detriment. But now that I know that, now that I know I'm a thought swapper and that this is what I do, I'm on to myself, right? I've got the awareness that I can dig deeper and figure it out. Find out, okay, I don't think this, I think that. But when I do think this, like I've had that thought before, when do I have that thought? What comes up with it, right? I know what I'm looking for. And I say that all the time, right? Like that's the purpose of the awareness step is we have to know what the problem is in order to solve it because you can't solve a problem without knowing what the problem is. And so once we have that, right, we know what it is. I know what the problem is. I know how to find it. I just have to do the work. And I know exactly what I'm going after. I know exactly what I'm looking for. I got to figure out how to find it all, right? I got to figure out what works for me to get curious about it. And that's why I recommend to journal regularly because when it's not what I would consider, and I don't really want to call it this, but like a pressured exercise. Like I've got to get everything out of my mind, right? It's just, it's kind of it's a big ask. It's a heavy lift. Like I got to get everything out. That's different than every morning I grab my journal and it's like, what's coming up for me this morning? And it's a regular practice I do. And I just am like, you know, I'm not trying to get every single thing. I'm just very casually, what am I thinking about this morning? And a lot of times what comes up for me is what do I want to do that day? Like, what do I got to get done? It's kind of my task list. But I'll also have some thoughts and emotions and things that come up just in general, how I'm feeling or something I'm worrying about or, whatever it is. There'll be other stuff there too, but it's more of a casual exercise where I'm just, seeing what comes up and I don't feel like there's this like predetermined pressure to get everything or get the right thing or get, exactly what I need to accomplish this. It's just it's just a more relaxed, casual exercise. And the more we do that and we get comfortable doing that, the more we'll just discover some of those thoughts that are hidden in the weeds, that are just under the surface or in the nooks and crannies, and just they're not the first thing that come to mind. And you'll start revealing more of that and you'll just start discovering more of that and you'll have that awareness around that and you'll notice things that maybe come up like a fleeting thought, right? Like you almost don't even have the whole thought. Like it's just almost like a smoke screen or a cloud that goes by that just dissipates, right? It's just there, but not completely there. And you'll get better at recognizing what those are, what they're related to, why they appear that way, and how to, be more successful in getting the complete thought, getting more of those, finding out where they're at, finding out what they are, And that part will just get easier as we just do the practice more casually and more regularly. And it just becomes part of what we do as part of our self-coaching practice. So I highly recommend that on the regular. And regular might not be every single day. Don't feel like I'm saying that, if you don't do it every day, then don't do it at all. For me, I just have my journal there. Sometimes I grab it, sometimes I don't. It's a very casual process for me. And then I'll get to the point where I'm like, whoa, I need to be journaling more. Like I'll just know that I'm carrying more that I need to be working through and process through. And so then I'm just more intentional about grabbing my journal. And then after I've journaled, more regularly, then I'll get to where it's like, I don't feel like doing that today, or I just don't feel like I need to, whatever it is. So it can look differently for every one of us, and it should reflect what we're comfortable with. But be intentional about making it part of a regular practice, because it really is a good kind of cleansing process where we're just allowing, building that awareness, allowing whatever comes up, comes out, and looking through it, right? Building that awareness piece around what is there and acknowledging, allowing, and not being quick to jump to a different thought, not thought swapping, not moving on without giving it the attention it needs first, just making sure that that's a huge part of the process. And then notice how that shifts for us, right? Because when we're trying to create new beliefs and new thought patterns and new constructs, we have to know what the old stuff is. We have to take the old tire off before we can put the new tire on and actually see the changes in our life. And you might, if you can imagine driving the car with two tires on, right? You kind of have this duplicity, you have this internal conflict, you kind of have both things at the same time. So it's not clear, and you don't make clear progress, and you don't create clean, clear results in our lives. We have kind of this tug of war, this resistance, even though like for me, I felt like I was doing the right things, but yet I wasn't getting to where I wanted to go. And I just knew there's something dragging on me. There's something hanging on. There's something, this extra tire still on the car that's helping me not go where I want to go. So hopefully that helps you, if this is something that you might be doing, or if any of my processes had been interpreted as just a thought swap, that once we discover the thought and we are intentional about our thought, that we move on without taking that pause and doing that step in between. So I love the concept of thought swapping, in that it's just a very clean and easy concept to understand, that you're just swapping it out. And we just want to understand that we don't want to just swap it. We want to be very intentional about every step in the process. We don't want to skip over anything. We want to give it our attention. We want to give it the attention it needs, the allowance, the acknowledgement, and allow and feel through it and process it through all of the steps and every part of it. So I will leave you with that. If you find yourself thought swapping, let me know. I'm very curious if anybody other than me does this on the regular basis. Not recommended. So I hope that this is very helpful, and that it builds awareness around something that you might be doing, helps you find some things that maybe have been challenging for you to discover. I will keep updating you on how my progress is going. With that, I will see you next week. Have an amazing week.